Surah 6. This surah is very confused to the westernized imagination of Richard Bell and contains passages from several periods. This appears in the beginning of the surah, verses 1 to 11, which appears to have been originally Meccan, to have been revised as the introduction to an early Medinan address, and then to have been turned against the Jews. A Meccan basis always appears, also appears in 12a and 13. There's no A and B, this is just speculation of an editing process and they're rearranging, and probably 17 and 18, but alterations and additions have been made to the passage at different times in Medina. Well, the narrations say that this was said that this goes here and this goes there, not the same thing as, but so also in verse 19, probably an early Medinan addition has been made to an originally Meccan verse. Verse 20 and 21 clearly refer to the Jews and have possibly been inserted somewhat later than the revision of 19, perhaps on the back of 22, 23, 24, which are perhaps Meccan, though doubtfully so, particularly in verse 24, verses 25 to 28 may belong to about the same time as 20, 21, and so also 33, 34, 39. These passages have been written on the back of more or less detached verses, some of which 29, 30, 35, 36 are Meccan. The others doubtful in date from verse 40 to 73. We again have revisions of and additions to Meccan verses, probably as part of the early Medinan address. Whether the original of this passage dealing with Abraham as Meccan is a little doubtful, but the rather confused list of messengers, verse 84 to 87, by which it seems to have been followed, must be fairly early. It has been replaced by the account of the argument by which Abraham became a monotheist, 75 to 79, 83, and rhyme phrases have been introduced into the list of messengers about the time of the adoption of the religion of Abraham. That seems more than one revision of the passage took place would seem to be implied in the occurrence of the three alternative endings, verse 88, 89, and 90. Yeah, that's not really what goes on with those things, but I'm kind of understanding his method of interpreting the matter. Verse 91 seems to be early Medinan, though it might possibly be Meccan, and has been turned against the Jews by a later insertion. This may have been done at the same time as the revision of the preceding passage and the insertion of the following one, which must date from after the complete break with the Jews and the resolution to produce an independent book. In verse 95 to 107, we have originally unrhymed Meccan passage on the signs, 95 to 99, 102 to 104. Rhymed phrases have been added and 99b inserted on the back of 100, 101, probably for the early Medinan address. Whether the substitution of 105 to 107 or 102 to 104 was made at the same time is impossible to say. It would more probably be done later. Verse 108a would be appropriate at a time when the Muhammad had not himself begun to attack that which is falsely treated as gods, but the second half of the verse is Medinan. Verse 109 to 111 are in phraseology suspiciously Medinan and will therefore probably belong to a fairly advanced stage of the controversy with the Jews. Verse 112a has been made at the beginning of an insertion dealing with foods, which is evidently later on the definition of forbidden foods in 146 to 148. The date of the original passage, 112a, 113, 122, is perhaps fixed by the use of the word Nabi as early Medinan, but is difficult to say who is the enemy here referred to. The intervening passage, 115, is probably also very early Medinan prior to the food controversy becoming acute. Verse 123, 124, the beginning of which is modeled on 112a or vice versa, may have been intended to follow 111, for the preceding insertion was made and 125 added at the time. That was done. Verse 126, 127, on the back of which 125 was written, would be in place after 120. Verse 132, 133, which are Medinan in language, were probably meant as an addition to follow 126, 127, written on the back of an already revised Meccan scrap. The intervening passage, 128, 131, again, it's probably Meccan, revised by the insertion of verse endings. Also 137 to 141 and 142 to 142 145. The verse ending, I don't know of any case where it's like, well, add this word and, to give it the verse rhyme with an A. It just, that sort of thing doesn't make sense. But so also 137 to 141 and 142 to 145, the latter of which has been an unrhymed passage on signs drastically added to at the time when the question of forbidden foods was being agitated. The question is settled by the passage. 146 to 148, 149 to 151 are probably unconnected through 150 and 151. May possibly be alternatives to the end of 149. They may have been used for the writing of 146 to 148, or in any case, somewhat earlier than that passage. So also are probably 152 to 153. Though the omission of any reference to forbidden foods might be due to their having immediately followed 146 to 148. The rather forced connection of 154 is probably due to its being a later addition suggested by 126, and the unconnected verse 155 may have stood on the back of the scrap on which it was written. This then suggested the passage dealing with the book 156, 159, which 156b rather breaks the connection between 156a and 157. Whether this was later then and written on the back of 160 to 165 is quite uncertain, as also whether 164 were originally continuous with 163 or were a discarded ending to the passage for which 162 and 163 were substituted, or whether there were really any or whether there were really three alternative endings versus 164, 163, 162. In any case, 162 will date from about the time of the adoption of the Creed of Abraham and the change of the Qibla. Well, the adoption of the Creed of Abraham wasn't actually per se done. They did, Muhammad before learning Qur'an. But okay. Al-Anam, chapter of the cattle. In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. Signs of the law and the unbelievers, probably originally Meccan, consisting of 1, 6, 11 as introduction to an early Medinan address. 2, 3 were substituted for 6, 11, later 4, 5 substituted for 2, 3, 7, 8, which has been altered by the insertion of 9, 10, either for continuation of 4, 5, or an earlier substitute for 6, 11. And the rain, the heaven sending copiously is, of course, the rain. And the messenger, where's the reference to the messenger? Him. So, so he's not an angel. And they'd be in confusion as before. And there's the dwelling or resting. That in the night, basically. And there's in verse 13, I don't know where he messes up the numbers, but people who lost themselves, and then we go on to talk about authority for the message. Verse 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Unbelievers, 29. The Meccan pagans and the Medinan Jews. So there's a difference between the two. Of course, the Medinan Suwar are the chapters that deal with, setting up a society. Are they forcing religion on people? No. But they're saying how to live your religion in a society. And so 25 to 28 is the Medinan Jews. The polytheists mean the people who have made association, false association. And the turned from, the suggested means revealed. The meaning of the verse owing to variation in the meaning fitna. So the temptation was the fitna. The turned from, who is acquitted on that day in verse 16, somewhat. Encouragement to the prophet in despondency. Meccan and Medinan are divided, so 33, 34, 39. Medinan, but formally 35, 36, 37, 38, but perhaps it can refer to those lessons, right? God alone, called upon in distress, Meccan, but revised later, 40 and 41. Result of neglecting a warning, 42 and 43. Possibly after a dearth in Mecca, but if so, rhyme phrases have been added in Medina. And there's a singular verb. We've noticed some places that the singular and the plural kind of does make a difference. So yourselves, so think about yourself. And 44, 45 relates to that. God, only one God, 46. 47 to 49, the believers are not to be included in the punishment. 50 to 55, response to Meccan criticism of his followers. And you have 54, 55 is supposed to be Medina verses, if this was Meccan. And the future, the unseen is part of the future. So be careful with your, all these soothsayers trying to predict the future. That's not really the point of prophets. And suddenly or openly able to enrich the followers and doers of everything, restored to them prosperity. And then you have the intimation. And let's go further on. 56 to 66 is thought to be things. There is a difference between wealth and station. And then you're tried regarding that. Everything in life, whether it's good or bad, is a trial. Not the evidence, but the threatened punishment. You counted it false. The punishment to hasten the lies, hasten, what you seek to hasten lies not with me. Okay, I should have read the whole sentence. Yeah, it's not with the religious people to decide when God's going to send his punishment. That's not really the thing. And recounting, as in deciding, the angels record the deeds in the unseen. The soul of man as in sleep. And we have warning to avoid those who ridicule the revelations, 67 to 71. The Qur'an or the punishment is realized. It's accepted. It's not accepted. So they're calling it false. And people are responsible for their own actions. And the purpose of the Quran is to remind. And then 70, 71, people are, we should refuse to turn to the worship of idols or worship of anything other than God. And they say Meccan revised in Medina. So I'm not sure the Meccan or Medinan attribute here, how straight that is. Meccan scraps revised in Medina, 72, 73. Abraham disputes with his people. He's convinced with monotheism, 74. Okay, the numbers are off with this, I think. But we have to 83 here, so there's some. So Abraham finds out about the kingdom of heaven and all that, and then he goes to put forth the lesson. Nowhere, it doesn't say, not even in English does it say that he's, that he worshipped these things, right? And then we have the mention of Isaac and Jonah and that sort of stuff. The possibility of revelation to a man, early Medinan, revised 91. The book sent to Muhammad and penalty of putting forward false revelations directed against the Jews, year 2 or 3, and that is to verse 92 to 94. But Elias, Yasa is Elisha, probably. And if the verse, what verse is Medinan? There's a verse, if verse 89 is Medinan, as almost certain, it would refer to the Jews, and those whom the true religion is entrusted would be Muhammad's followers. And Abraham's servant, Eliezer, Erskinel is the reference to the Tsar. But actually, if you look into it, no, that's not it. It refers to something different. But so 95 to 100 to 99 is just references to signs, Meccan, originally unrhymed, revised and rhymed early in Medina. But again, there's no earlier version that does this. They're coming up with a supposed editing process, right? Folly of polytheism, Meccan, 100 to 107. Verse 94. Well, the whole Qur'an is meant to be, is supposed to be the word of God. But 94 is like a speech that God gives, right? As distinct, right? The verb means properly to preparate, and inserted here is to ascribe falsely. So that reference there, the asserting to what has existed. And well, they postulate sons and daughters for divinity. Okay, verse 108 alludes to other deities, a Meccan council revised in Medina. 109, a sign of no use, early Medinan, probably referring to the Jews. The polytheists, or okay, where's note 1? But probably in a race or competition with you. So the response, if you blaspheme other people's religion, they're going to respond to compete with you in a way. And the associators means, of course, the polytheists. Opposition to the prophet, 12 and 13, 100 and 114. Perfection of Allah's guidance, early Medinan, to 120. Oh, I guess 121. Verse 146 can be connected to verse 19. And led astray, go astray, same thing. We have, they are acquiring guilt. So those who are disregarding, right? 123, 124, and 125, opposition to the Jewish leaders, possibly followed by 109 to 111, 125 added later. So we have a judgment scene starting verse 128, verse 100 revised in Medina, and after 131 we have Meccan, verse 136 probably Medinan, and the Arab paganism, probably Meccan revised in Medina, 137 to 141. 142 starts to mention about signs, Meccan adapted in Medina to combat food taboos. So 142 to 145, 146 to 148 is still forbidden foods. We're talking Medinan. And retort to a mocking argument, early Medinan, verse 150, 151, maybe in alternate endings to 149 are entirely detached. Those who have associated others with the law will say, if Allah had so willed, we should not have associated anything with him, neither we nor our fathers, nor should we have made anything forbidden. So did those who were before them count the message false until they taste our violence, say, have you any revealed knowledge, bring it forth for us then. If ye follow nothing but opinion, and ye are only conjecturing. And the carry on, well, the one who died of itself is the dead animal. And the The claws can hardly mean the hoof, although references no doubt to the cloven hoof of Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14. You know, it's the meat-eating animals, the garbage-dwelling thing too. You know, the very dirty, very foul. It's not just the pig; it's some other things too. And they're throwing in some commentary if they're saying the claws or something. And see different roles for the Jews though. So the divided hoof, yeah, it can mean the divided hoof, right? Ganem, including the sheep and the goats. 152, 153 are religious duties. Medinan probably earlier than 146 to 148, 154 added later, 155, 154. Meccan, the same. The book revealed to Muhammad, 156, 157, 158. This is year 2 or 3 versus 156b, a later substitute for 157 to 159. Okay, and 160 to 165 is Muhammad independent of Jews and Christians, year 2. And Surah 7, this surah consists of 3 main parts: an address to men in general based on the story of creation and the fall, a series of stories of punishment inflicted on peoples for unbelief, and the story of Moses, which leads on to that of the children of Israel. At the beginning is an introduction, verses 1 through 8, the arrangement of which is very uncertain. That there is a break between verse 1 and 2 appears from the change of address. Verse 3 and 4 and 5 to 8 might connect with verse 1, or the two together might be continuous with verse 2. The figure of the balances, however, appears to be early, like 23, 104, and 101, 5, while 3 and 4 are apparently related to verse 95, which refer to the Jewish colonies in Medina. Verse 2 and 4 are therefore probably an addition to the introduction written on the back of an earlier passage, verse 5 and 8. 5 to 8. This written in earlier. They're just guessing at what if I was going to edit this, how would I have done it? The story that beliefs and the fall of Adam show both signs of having been built up at different times, but were either composed as they stand here or taken over from some earlier version. In any case, they are probably earlier than the introduction. The series of admonition to the children of Adam which follow are of different dates, but have been revised for the present position. The revisions seem to date from the time of controversy with the Jews. The last of the admonitions, verse 33, was probably early Medinan to begin with, and was continued by verse 38, 44, 46, 47, an account of the judgment which shows distinct Christian influences was however discarded, all but the beginning of 38, which was then continued by 39, 40 AC, 41, 42a, 45. This was revised by the substitution of 42b, 43, 48, 49 for 45. All the stuff still remains continuous, so there is no substitution. The later verse, along with the other discarded, the much revised passage 38, and perhaps entirely discarded and replaced by 34, 35, which furnished the contrast to 33, and was for the writing of which the back of a considerably older scrap was utilized. Verse 50, 51, which had been probably written on the back of a sign passage, may then have been intended to follow 34 and 35. The sign passage, which is entirely out of connection here, has itself been much revised, as was probably early Meccan, arise perhaps finally for Medinan use. In the form in which they stand here, the stories of punishment are certainly Medinan, especially the phraseology in the story of Shu'aib, verse 83, but they are based on earlier material. Those of Noah, Hud, Saleh, and Shu'aib are bound together by the phrase we sent, verse 57, while that of Lot, which intervenes, verses 78 through 82, is differently introduced and was probably an addition to an earlier group in which, however, It had no doubt taken its place for the composition of this surah. See the Muslim World, 1934, pages 324. Again, we see different things going on with that grouping that makes it absolutely not necessary for there to be some editing. Oh, we're going to write this part different. At a different time. It could be all at the same time. That these 5 stories originally stood by themselves is shown by the intervention of 92 to 100, which contain probably the 3 conclusions to the discourse. Of these, 99 was perhaps the earliest. 95 to 97 distinctly point the morale against the Jewish colonies in Medina, while 92 to 94 draw the lesson that the coming of a prophet always causes distress. The story of Moses was evidently meant as an appendix to a group of punishment stories already given. It was also based on earlier material, and in fact, up to 122 is practically taken from Surah 26. From there onwards to 133, where the punishment story really ends, it is more independent, and then enter upon the subsequent history of the people of Moses. The treatment here appears on the whole to be earlier than that in Surah 2. But there are latter insertions, especially of 141 to 145, 151, 152, and 156, which has latter been written on the back of an extraneous passage, 157 to 158. While if they don't have it, the passage, they don't have the example of things been written in these fragments or whatever, where, how do they, the extraneous passage is like, if it's part of it, it's part of it. And if it's on one page with the front of one page and one manuscript or something, it's like, you know, if anything's on the back, it's because they're writing on both sides, not that, you know, there are traces of an earlier rhyme in A in the portion of the story, and this becomes quite clear in 159 to 162. They look as though they might have originally intended to form part of Surah 20 and been re-rhymed to suit their position in this Surah. The same underlying rhyme may be detected in 163 to 166a, but this story was probably discovered to be apocryphal and has also been revised to be almost unrecognizable. Well, there's different purposes and stuff going on rather than just people who compose the secret history. The Qur'an's not actively doing that quite the same way that you'd expect with other books. So also in 166b to 168, which has also been revised and added to the same time as this edition may belong to the enigmatic story of the messenger who failed to carry out his commission, which has been written on the back of a number of unconnected scraps, and the threat to the Jews, 181 to 885, itself possibly based on a Meccan passage and written on the back of 186 to 188. At the end of the surah, we have a number of passages which seem to have little connections with the rest of it. Most of them have had Medinan additions made to them. World, okay. Surat al-Araf, chapter of the Araf, and the name of the law. I'm not reading that part. The Medinan heading is the first verse. From verse 5 to 8, we have the last judgment, late Meccan. 2 to 4, obedience to revelation demanded Medinan, perhaps referring to Jews. Verse 9 to 24, Allah's dealings with mankind, probably Meccan with later additions. The idea is that, you know, the note here, the idea is what they have done will be established and there will be no possibility of concealment. And then there's the weighing and the weighed, you know, the standard, the weighing or the weight, standard by which all things will be tried. And we have, of course, mentioned to the power, you know, the place that people are given. And then 25 to 27, 28, I guess, a series of morals appended to the story, probably of different dates. 29, 30, 31, and 33, 33. Okay, a judgment scene, 34 to 37. There's a pronoun. Oh no, pronoun. No, not that sort of thing, but the day of the resurrection, whether it's a people were, oh, I scrolled ahead, right? The pronoun referring to the adornment and good things spoken of in the first part of the verse, but improbably. And then we find a reference, the messengers, seem to be to the Jews or Christians who have received a portion of the book and will be judged by it. So whatever good and truth that remains from the previous messengers, those communities are going to be judged by it. The angels of death, the messengers coming. Fate of those who refuse to believe, 38 to 41. And then we have further verses, 43, 49, 47, everything in between. Matthew 19:24, the eye of the needle. You know, there was a gate in the cities, right? And that gate in cities, you take off your load. So the gate, you take off your disbelief. It's the Qur'an reference. You give charity is the Bible reference. It's not too hard to understand, I don't think. Reading by conjecture, Roth, instead of the intelligible, Roth, Beat the Muslim World, 1932, page 43. The idea is probably based on Matthew 25:31. And on the verse 50 and 51, the book, the norm of judgment, may continue 49 at any rate about the same time as 34, 35. Signs probably early scratch revised, possibly more than once. 52, 53, 54, 55, 55 and 56, the effects of the rain, possibly continuation of 52 before the insertion of 53 and 54 revised as an argument for the resurrection. The seeking, the following it quickly refers to the seeking it urgently, generally is referring to the night, following quickly upon the day. The ill-disposed being those who provoke hostility, 186. Varied lectures, the bringing of good tidings, ranging widely. And then we have the reference, the driving the rain. Note the occurrence of the same word in a different sense in the preceding verse. This is the earlier use. And then we're probably referring to the clouds through which the word has already been treated as a plural. And Noah is the penalty of rejecting a messenger, an earlier series of stories in this form, probably mainly late Meccan, but with early Medinan revisions here and there. Noah and his people, 57 to 62. Hud and the people of Ad, 63 to 70. Saleh and the people of Thamud, 71 to 77. Lot and his people, 78 to 82. The abomination, well, the wrath, the names, you know, people and their false gods, all these people and their threatened punishment and all that. Lana's people to 82, Shuaib 83 to 91. There's a phrase that stands at the beginning of verse 90 that seems to belong to as a gloss to them. 92 to 94, the coming of a prophet causes distress, early Medinan. 95 to 98, appellation to the Jewish colonies, early Medinan. 99 to 133, conclusion of the punishment stories, followed verse 91, And we go back a little bit, become luxurious is a possibility to they wiped out the impression. So, they focus on the stuff they didn't need. Moses and Pharaoh, an early Medinan edition, the preceding census stories based on Surah 26. And so it is incumbent on me that, on the basis that, in regard to them, the signs. And verse 134 to 155, Moses and the children of Israel, early Medinan, continuation of what precedes. And we have reference to the Holy Land. We have the vicegerent, the Caliph, that sort of role. Possibly my speaking to thee is, the be my successor. Oh, no, that's the vicegerent. What's the other one? Oh, my word. Okay. And the terracing is mentioned. And we have reference, we can think of Exodus 33:18. And so we go forward a bit. The appearance with a low voice of the statue, Talmudic, according to Rodwell. And then there was literally falling in their hands, usually interpreted as meaning when they repented, but more probably meaning when they stumbled and, they fell on their hands. And the Arabic word for hasten resembles that for calf. And then there was the literal falling silence, the anger died away. And then we have call to believe in the messenger, Medinan, 157 to 156 to 160a. Okay, that continues quite a bit here. And so we have the reversion to, okay, the prophet, the native prophet belonging to the community, basically, but implying a lack of scripture, like verse 273. So he didn't, he was not learned in the other claims of revelation. The Judaizing, as in reverting to, find mention of the Torah, literally written, wavering in regard to the acting fairly. And we still continue here, but 255 is compared to, okay, where's the numbers aren't as easy to find as I would think. The Heta thing, the context which may be compared with the whole passage. And there's some uncertainness. While the turning of the apes, like Marco Polo translated Yule, the locality of the legend suggests that the Kurds may have been associated with a paired ape. Okay. And Sabbath on the shore or on the surface. Okay. The covenant of mankind, 69 to 170, 169 to 172. And there's a clause with a later addition, anything but the truth. And then the end of verse 168 is thought to be added by this author. And we have the backs, the book and man. So from their loins, the children of Adam, it was known what he was going to produce, obviously. And a messenger who failed, 174 to 176. And there's a connection, 177, detached, early Medinan, detached Meccan. Why is it detached? And then there's talk about verses that have been intended to follow 170 rather than 172. The reference to the person who's made the signs is quite uncertain. It's suggested to be Umayyah bin Abi as Salt, Others, Alam. It may be the story of the disobedient prophet, 1 Kings 13, which lies behind the passage, or perhaps some Christian legend, Timothy 1, from 1, verse 20, or 2 Timothy 4, 10, Philippians 3, 2. It's bad to be compared to sons, people who think that God has a son with an O. Then we have some detached things, verse 180, coming of the last day, 186 to 188, Medinan referring to the Jews, 181 to 185, perhaps based on a Meccan passage, creation of man and origin of polytheism, late Meccan or early Medinan, perhaps somehow connected with 52 to 56, and that's 189. Wavering in regard to, see chapter 5, 159. Thereby acting fairly. Okay, so act fairly instead of wavering in regard to. The futility of sub-gods, those things that people treat as gods, but they act like there's a top god, possibly a continuation of 189 and 190, with 197 added later, 193 to 197. The private conduct of the prophet under rejection, Meccan revised with later editions of 200, 201, so 198, 199, 200, and 201, 202, 203, demand for a sign, Meccan, verse 203, perhaps early Medinan, the prophet to practice private donations, 204 to the end of the chapter. Then there's that verse where you prostrate. Oh, well, I guess that's it, Meccan. But so the messages are suggested by this: demonstrations for your Lord. When you don't bring them a sign, here not a verse of the Qur'an, but a sign as was given to Moses and other prophets. Their brethren led them into perversity, so Satan's. And a verse may be formed, the last verse where you prostrate, might form a part of what is said, but is evidently addressed to the believers, as were the preceding answers and objection of the opponents. And of course, we have the angels, so those with God, so the loyal host, those ungendered angels. Thou seest is a pronoun meant indefinitely. Pay no attention to insults. The meaning is uncertain, but the passage be Medinan, but may take what the people can spare. Yeah, strive for the good character, whether the insult's true, whether whatever. Verse 217 of chapter 2, and then we have it reminding themselves of Allah. And well, I was going to turn this into 4-chapter part, but I'm going to have to stop.